We're Root, and we can save you up to 52% off your car insurance.
So, 2 months ago, something crazy happened. Can you talk us through this? Because this caught so many people's attention.
I'll stay quiet to the very beginning, and then I'll start talking.
4, 3, 2, 1.
No, this was such an important moment for SpaceX. With the Falcon 9 and now the Falcon Heavy, we can launch into orbit any payload that has previously been conceived or is conceived right now. We've got a couple of launches of Falcon Heavy later this year, so this had to go right. It was the first time we flew it. And the star of the show, of course, brother and sister side boosters landing. I was excited. Thanking my team. By the way, there's maybe 1,000 people standing around me right there. And Starman. Starman did not steal the show, though. The boosters did.
There had to be some payload. Why not put a Tesla into space? I mean,
exactly. It's perfect.
Gwyn, let's wind the clock back. I mean, how did you end up as engineer and president of SpaceX? Were you super nerdy as a girl?
I don't think I was nerdy, but I was definitely doing the things that the girls weren't doing. I asked my mom, who was an artist, when I was in 3rd grade, how a car worked. So she had no idea, so she gave me a book, and I read it. And sure enough, my first job out of my mechanical engineering degree was with Chrysler Motors in the automotive industry. But I actually got into engineering not because of that book, but because my mom took me to a Society of Women Engineers event. And I fell in love with the mechanical engineer that spoke. She was doing really critical work, and I loved her suit. And that's what a 15-year-old girl connects with. And I used to shy away from telling that story. But if that's what caused me to be an engineer, hey, I think we should talk about that.
16 years ago, you became employee number 7 at SpaceX. And then over the next years, you built a multi-billion-dollar relationship with NASA, despite the fact that SpaceX's first 3 launches blew up. I mean, how on earth did you do that?
So actually selling rockets is all about relationships and making a connection with these customers. When you don't have a rocket to sell, what's really important is selling your team, selling the business savvy of your CEO. That's not really hard to sell these days. And basically making sure that any technical issue that they have or any concern you can address right away. So I think it was helpful for me to be an engineer. I think it was helpful to my role as running sales for Elon.
Currently, a big focus of the company is, I guess, kind of a race with Boeing to be the first to provide the service to NASA of actually putting humans into orbit. Safety considerations obviously come to the fore here. How are you sleeping?
I actually sleep really well. I'm a good sleeper. That's my best thing. But I think the days leading up to our flying crew will probably be a little sleepless. But really, fundamentally, safety comes in the design of the system that you're going to fly people on. And so we've been working for years, actually almost a decade, on this.
As soon as I get finished eating, we're going to hop on some paintings. This is delicious, bro. No.
Technology. We're taking the Dragon cargo spaceship and we're upgrading it to be able to carry crew. And as I said, we've been engineering in these safety systems for quite some time.
So there's one system that actually allows instant escape if there's a problem?
That's right. It's called the Launch Escape System.
I think we have that. Let's show that.
We've got a video of a test that we ran in 2015. So this simulated having a really bad day on the pad. Basically, you want the capsule to get out of Dodge. You want it to get away from the rocket that had a bad day right below it. This is if there was an issue on the pad. We also will be doing another demonstration later this year on if we have an issue with the rocket during flight.
And those rockets have another potential function as well eventually.
Yeah, so the launch escape system for Dragon is pretty unique. It's an integrated launch escape system. It's basically a pusher. So the propellant system and the thrusters are integrated into the capsule. And so if it detects a rocket problem, it pushes the capsule away. Capsule safety systems in the past have been like tractor pullers. And the reason we didn't want to do that is that puller needs to come off before you can safely re-enter that capsule. So we wanted to eliminate in design that possibility of failure.
I mean, SpaceX has made the regular reusability of rockets seem almost routine, which means you've done something that no national space program, for example, has been able to achieve. How was that possible?
I think there's a couple of things that have allowed, well, there's a million things actually that have allowed SpaceX to be successful. The first is that we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, right? We got to look at the rocket industry and the developments to date, and we got to pick the best ideas, leverage them. We also didn't have technology that we had to include in our vehicle systems, so we didn't have to kind of design around legacy components that maybe weren't the most reliable or were particularly expensive. So we really were able to let physics drive the design of these systems.
I mean, there are other programs started from scratch. That last phrase you said there, you let physics drive the design. What's an example of that?
There's hundreds of examples, actually, of that. But basically, we got to construct the vehicle design from really a clean sheet of paper, and we got to make decisions that we wanted to make. The tank architecture, it's a common dome design. Basically, it's like 2 beer cans stacked together, one full of liquid oxygen, one full of RP, and that basically saved weight. It allowed us to basically take more payload for the same design. One of the other elements of the vehicle that we're flying right now is we do use densified liquid oxygen and densified RP, so it's ultra cold. And it allows you to pack more propellant into the vehicle. It is done elsewhere, probably not to the degree that we do it, but it adds a lot of margin to the vehicle, which obviously adds reliability.
Gwyn, you became president of SpaceX 10 years ago, I think. What's it been like to work so closely with Elon Musk?
Oh, I love working for Elon. I've been doing it for 16 years this year, actually. I don't think I'm dumb enough to do something for 16 years that I don't like doing. He's funny, and fundamentally, without him saying anything, he drives you to do your best work. He doesn't have to say a word. You just want to do great work.
You might be the person best placed to answer this question, which has puzzled me, which is to shed light on this strange unit of time called Elon time. For example, last year I asked Elon, when Tesla would auto-drive across America, and he said by last December, which is definitely true if you take Elon time into account. So what's the conversion ratio between Elon time and real time?
You put me in a unique position, Chris. Thanks for that. There's no question that Elon is very aggressive on his timelines, but frankly, that drives us to do things better and faster. I think all the time and all the money in the world does not yield the best solution, and so putting that pressure on the team to move quickly is really important.
It feels like you play a kind of a key intermediary role here. I mean, he sets these crazy goals that have their impact,
Yeah, I was taking pictures in the mirror.
Circumstances might blow up the team or set impossible expectations. It feels like you've found a way of saying yes, Elon, and then
Oh my God.
making it happen in a way that is acceptable both to him and to your company, to your employees.
There was two really important realizations for that. First of all, when Elon says something, you have to pause and not immediately blurt out, well, that's impossible, or there's no way we're going to do that, I don't know how to do that. So you zip it, and you think about it, and you find ways to get that done. And the other thing I realized, and it made my job satisfaction substantially harder. So I always felt like my job was to take these ideas, kind of turn them into company goals, make them achievable, and kind of roll the company over from this steep slope, get it comfortable. And I noticed every time I felt like we were there, we were rolling over, people were getting comfortable, Elon would throw something out there, and all of a sudden we're not comfortable, and we're climbing that steep slope again. But then once I realized that that's his job, and my job is to get the company close to comfortable, so he can push again and put us back on that slope, then I started liking my job a lot more, instead of always being frustrated.
And so if I estimated that the conversion ratio for Elon time to real time is about 2x, am I a long way out there, or?
That's not terrible, and you said it. I didn't.
Okay. Looking ahead, one huge initiative SpaceX is rumored to be working on is a massive network of literally thousands of low Earth orbit satellites to provide high bandwidth, low cost internet connection to every square foot of planet Earth. Is there anything you can tell us about this?
We actually don't chat very much about this particular project, not because we're hiding anything, but this is probably one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging project we've undertaken. No one has been successful deploying a huge constellation for internet broadband, or basically for satellite internet. And I don't think physics is the difficulty here. I think we can come up with the right technology solution, but we need to make a business out of it. And it'll cost the company about $10 billion or more to deploy this system. And so we're marching steadily along, but we're certainly not claiming victory yet.
I mean, the impact, obviously, if that happened to the world of connectivity everywhere, would be pretty radical. And perhaps mainly for good people would hear, I mean, it changes a lot. Suddenly everyone can connect cheaply.
Yeah, there's no question it'll change the world.
How much of a worry
That food was
is
so
it,
good.
how much of a drag on the planning is
Because
it? Concerns just about
I
space
cooked
junk. People worry a lot about this. This would be a huge increase in the total number of satellites in orbit. Is that a concern?
I couldn't even
So
say nothing while I was
debris
eating.
is a concern.
Damn, that shit was
There's
delicious.
no question. Not because it's so likely to happen, but the consequences of it happening are pretty devastating. You could basically spew a bunch of particles in orbit that could take out that orbit from being useful
I'm proud of
for
myself.
decades or longer. So, as a matter of fact, we are required to bring down our second stage after every mission so it doesn't end up being a rocket carcass orbiting Earth. So you really need to be a good steward of that.
So, despite the remarkable success there of that Falcon Heavy rocket, you're actually not
so good.
As your future development plan. You're doubling down to a much bigger rocket called the BFR, which stands for
The Big Falcon Rocket.
the Big Falcon Rocket. That's right. What's the business logic of doing this when you invested all that in that incredible technology and now you're just going to something much bigger? Why?
Actually, we've learned some lessons over the duration where we've been developing these launch systems. What we want to do is not introduce a new product before we've been able to convince the customers that this is the product that they should move to. So we're working on the Big Falcon rocket now, but we're going to continue flying Falcon 9s and Falcon Heavies until there is absolute widespread acceptance of BFR. But we are working on it right now. We're just not going to cancel Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy and just put in place BFR. But, okay.
No, I was going to say, the logic is that BFR is what you need to take humanity to Mars.
That's correct.
But somehow you've also found other business ideas for this.
Yes, BFR can take the satellites that we're currently taking to orbit, to many orbits. It allows for even a new class of satellites to be delivered to orbit. Basically, the width, the diameter of the fairing is 8 meters. So you can think about what giant telescopes you can put in that fairing, in that cargo bay, and see really incredible things and discover incredible things in space. But then there's some residual capabilities that we have out of BFR as well.
Oh, a residual capability?
It's a residual capability.
Is that what you call this? Talk about what the heck this is. Oh, wait a sec.
That's Falcon Heavy. That's worth pointing out, by the way. What a beautiful rocket. And that hangar could just fit the Statue of Liberty in it. So you get a sense of size of that Falcon Heavy rocket.
And the fact that the 27 engines that's part of the design principle, that you, rather than just inventing ever bigger rockets, you team them up.
It's exactly this residual capability. So we developed the Merlin engine for the Falcon 1 launch vehicle. We could have tossed that engine and built an entirely new engine for the Falcon 9. It would have been called something different, obviously, because Falcon 9 is 9 Merlin engines. But instead of spending $1 billion on a brand new engine, we put 9 of them together on the back end of Falcon 9. Residual capability, glue 3 Falcon 9s together and you have the largest operational rocket flying. And so it was expensive to do, but it was a much more efficient path than starting from scratch.
And the BFR is the equivalent of how much bigger than that in terms of its power?
BFR is about 2.5 times the size of
I gotta turn this down. Fan
So
on this
that
side.
allows you, I still don't really believe this video that we're about to play here. What on earth is this?
So it currently is on Earth, but this is basically space travel for Earthlings. I can't wait for this residual capability. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to fly VFR like an aircraft and do point-to-point travel on Earth. So you can take off from New York City or Vancouver and fly halfway across the globe. You'll be on the VFR for roughly half an hour or 40 minutes. And the longest part of that, yeah, it's so awesome. The longest part of that flight is actually the boat out and back.
I mean, Gwen, come on, this is awesome, but it's crazy, right? Like, this is never going to actually happen.
Oh no, it's definitely going to happen. This is definitely going to happen.
How? Like, what? I mean, so first of all, countries are going to accept this incoming missile that's landing on,
So, Chris, can you imagine us trying to convince a federal range Air Force bases to take the incomers? Because we're doing it now regularly, right? We're bringing the first stages back, and we're landing them on federal property on an Air Force base. So I think doing it, 10 kilometers out from the city, maybe it's only 5 kilometers out from the city.
How many countries could possibly afford the fortune of flying by jet?
So the first VFR is going to have roughly 100 passengers. And let's talk a little bit about the business. Everyone thinks rockets are really expensive, and to a large degree they are, and how could we possibly compete with airline tickets here? But if you think about it, this trip in half an hour to an hour, I can do dozens of these a day, right? And yet a long-haul aircraft can only make one of those flights a day. So even if my rocket was slightly more expensive and the fuel is a little bit more expensive, I can run 10x at least what they're running in a day and really make the revenue that I need to out of that system.
So you really believe this is going to be deployed at some point in our amazing future? When? When do you...
Within a decade, for sure.
This is Win time or Elon time?
That's win time. I'm sure Elon will want us to go faster.
That's okay. That's certainly amazing.
I'm personally invested in this one because I travel a lot and I do not love to travel. And I would love to get to see my customers in Riyadh leave in the morning and be back in time to make dinner.
So we're going to test that. So within 10 years, an economy price ticket or like a couple $1,000
Yes.
per person to
Yes.
fly New York to Shanghai.
Yeah, I think it'd be between economy and business. But you do it in an hour.
Yeah. Well, okay. That is definitely something. And meanwhile, the other use of VFR is being developed to go a little bit further than Shanghai. Talk about this. This is you guys have actually developed quite a detailed picture of how humans might fly to Mars and what that would look like.
Yeah, so we've got a video. This is a cropped video from others we've shown, and there's a couple of new bits to it. But basically, you're going to lift off from a pad. You've got a booster as well as the BFS, the Big Falcon spaceship, going to take off. The booster is going to drop the spaceship off in orbit, low Earth orbit, and then return, just like we're returning boosters right now. So it sounds incredible, but we're working on the pieces, and you can see us achieve these pieces. So booster comes back. The new thing here is that we're going to actually land on the pad that we launched from. Currently, we land on a separate pad, or we land out on a boat. Fast, quick command. You take a cargo ship full of fuel, or a fuel depot, put it on that booster, get that in orbit, do a docking maneuver, refuel the spaceship, and head on to your destination. And this one is Mars.
So, like 100 people go to Mars at one time, taking what, 6 months, 2 months?
It ends up depending on how big the rocket is. I think this first version, and we'll continue to make even bigger VFRs, I think it's a 3-month trip. Right now the average is like 6 to 8, but we're going to try to do it faster.
When do you believe SpaceX will land the first human on Mars?
It's very similar time frame from the point to point. It's the same capability. It will be within this decade. Not this decade.
In real time, I guess, within a decade. Well, that would also be amazing. Why though? Seriously, why? I mean, you've got a company where this is the official stated mission. Is everyone actually bought into that mission? Given that, I mean, there's a lot of people here, there's a lot of people around who think, come on, you've got so much talent, so much technology, capability. There's so many things on Earth that need urgent attention. Why would you have this escape trip off to another planet?
So I am glad you asked that, but I think we need to expand our minds a little bit. There are plenty of things to do on Earth, but there are lots of companies working on that. I think we're working on one of the most important things we possibly can, and that's to find another place for humans to live and survive and thrive. If there were to have something, if something happened on Earth, you need humans living somewhere else. It's the fundamental risk reduction for the human species, and this does not subvert making our planet here better and doing a better job taking care of it. But I think you need multiple paths to survival, and this is one of them. And then let's not talk about the downer piece, like you go to Mars to make sure all Earthlings don't die. That's terrible. Actually, it's a terrible reason to go do it. Fundamentally, it's another place to explore, and that's what makes humans different from animals, is our sense of exploration and sense of wonderment and learning something new. And then I also have to say, this is the first step in us moving to other solar systems and potentially other galaxies. And I think this is the only time I ever outvision Elon, because I want to meet other people in other solar systems. Mars is fine, but it is a fixer-upper planet. There's work to do there to make it habitable. I want to find people, or whatever they call themselves, in another solar system.
That is a big vision. Wynne Shotwell, thank you. You have one of the most amazing jobs on the planet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Look at you. You noticed the details. So after weeks of seeing this and unloading these and restocking those and bagging that, well, time to put some skin in the game. And Robin Hood is right there with you.
lifetimes. And this is a simulation of the overall system.
Let's get serious. Quickset, makers of smart key security technology, defeats advanced break-in techniques. 2, 0.
This video was shot last May when NASA launched its $830 million InSight mission with the goal of landing on Mars. Tomorrow, the world will be watching to see if the spacecraft can make it through the perilous 7 minutes of terror and land on the surface of the red planet. Here to tell us about what we might learn from the mission is NASA's Stephen Clark, who heads the agency's exploration efforts. Welcome to Face the Nation.
Thank you.
What are the 7 minutes of terror?
Well, the 7 minutes of terror are the time it takes from when the actual probe enters the Mars atmosphere until it lands. And the reason it's called the 7 minutes of terror is because it's very hard to land on Mars. In fact, only 40% of all landing attempts have been successful.
Only 40% have actually made it. And the U.S. is still the only country that has done that.
That's correct, yes.
So why are we spending the money to do this? What exactly do you think is going to be learned?
We're continuing to investigate Mars because Mars was formed at the same time as the Earth and the Moon. And the more we learn about our neighboring planets, it helps us learn how the Earth evolved. In fact, we know that Mars had water on the surface and it had an atmosphere somewhat similar to Earth millions and millions of years ago. But for some reason, Mars developed differently, and we were trying to find out why.
This is the InSight probe. This is not manned. How close are we to putting humans on Mars?
Well, we continue to perfect landing techniques using robotic landers on Mars. And certainly we're going to be using that technology to develop landers to return to the Moon with humans first. And as we learn more on how to do that, we're going to then apply it to Mars for our first human exploration of Mars after we've established our presence on the Moon in a more permanent basis than we have in the past. As you know, with Apollo, we landed 6 times. We're going to return this time and actually learn to live off the planet, learn our lessons on the Moon, which is a lot closer than Mars. And then when we're ready, we'll take humans to Mars, which is a much longer journey.
How many years out are we from that?
We're looking at for the Moon, we'd like to return humans in the late 2020s. Certainly we will continue to work through our technology development and see how long that takes. And we're looking at taking humans to Mars sometime in the 2030s.
The 2030s?
2030s.
So NASA is one of the agencies that signed off on this climate report that came out last week. there's been a lot of controversy around it, some questions about politics, but you're a scientist. You look at data. How do Americans understand this warming?
Well, NASA is one of 13 agencies that contributes to that climate report. And so we continue to acquire data with all of our Earth orbiting satellites, and we provide that data to a wide range of researchers who develop their findings and so forth like that. And we've seen through these climate reports that the climate is changing. And it's good that we know how it's changing so that we can better prepare for those more what I'd call severe changes that we've seen through the weather. But we'll continue to provide rich data for the researchers to come up with their findings, which will then help governments really globally prepare for various weather scenarios and how the climate continues to change.
And just learning more about these other planets like Mars to help in any way solve the challenges that you're seeing on this planet.
It certainly could, and that's why we continue to explore. As we understand better how these worlds formed and why they went through the various evolutions like they did, it can unlock some of the mysteries that we have here on Earth that we could potentially apply here and better prepare, certainly.
So understanding how Mars was formed could potentially help us understand how to do what here on Earth?
Well, as we learn more about why the atmosphere changed and how it thinned with Mars, and if we can better understand the processes that caused that, then if we can apply that to Earth and see if there are any similarities, then we may be able to determine ways to maybe even help prevent those things from happening.
It's fascinating.
It is.
And we'll be watching tomorrow the landing around 3 p.m. Eastern.
3 p.m. Eastern.
12 p.m. Pacific. We will be watching.
Okay.
Good luck with those 7 minutes of terror.
Thank you.
We will be right back.
Memorial Day sale at 8.
The best time to buy a grill from our exclusive lineup of premium brands.
Get free assembly and free delivery on grills $3.99 and up, plus free fuel.
Ace is the place with the helpful hardware, folks.
I first got interested in the idea of going to Mars when I was 3 years old.
And liftoff.
She wants to be the first or one of the first to go to Mars.
She's a regular kid with a dream that she's willing to pursue.
Spaceflight is very risky business. You have to take it serious, or you will die.
If the option was to go to Mars and never come back, I would still want to go and be a part of the mission.
When Alyssa was younger, I remember Alyssa coming to me and asking me, had human beings ever been to Mars? And I explained to her that, we'd been to the moon, but not Mars, but it would be her generation to become the Mars generation and go to Mars.
Hey, this would be something really cool. I mean, go into space and then land on other planets.
Little did I know that I would be raising a child that I'm supporting to leave this planet.
I do everything that every other normal kid does, except on the side I'm training to become an astronaut and go to Mars.
Kids are always told, you can do whatever you want to do. You can be whatever you want to be. Alyssa has heard that, but she has accepted that I'm going to have to work really, really hard to get to where I want to be.
She's the youngest to ever graduate from Advanced Space Academy, was the first person to complete all NASA space camps in the world. Got her rocket license before getting her driver's permit,
Currently, I have my basic scuba diver certification, and I'm working on my advanced.
She's doing the International Baccalaureate, so she's doing college level classes in 10th grade.
Multilingual education, so she's taking her classes in 4 languages, English, French, Spanish, Chinese.
She's got the right mental attitude. She's doing everything that she can physically here on Earth to prepare herself for that journey to Mars.
I don't think there's anything specifically that makes it easier for me or makes it something that others can't do. It's just something that I've kind of really focused myself on what I want to accomplish.
By the mid-2030s, I believe we can send humans to orbit Mars and return them safely to Earth.
Going to Mars is absolutely essential for continuing the human species as a whole.
It's very important that we keep exploring because it has already been said that a single planet species will become extinct. Just going to Mars is that first baby step and showing people that we can move on from planet Earth, which is kind of like our little cradle now.
We're destroying our own planet. If we don't continue to explore, we could end up not having a planet to live on.
So even though there are a lot of risks in going to Mars, I believe that the rewards are so much greater. Yeah, space is a dangerous place, and yeah, there's so much that I'm giving up for it, but at the end of the day, there's so much good that can come from this mission. The big plans for Mars is eventually terraforming it, change Mars to kind of become like another Earth, to have a second home for humans to live on.
Yeah, I had asked my one of my ex, her nephew, I was like, I told him the same thing. I was like, bro, it's gonna be you're part of the generation that may make it to Mars. I was like, would you want to explore a different planet? He was like, nah, I'm good. I'm like, you wouldn't want to try to be a fucking like some geophysicist and go study shit on Mars. He was like, nah, I wouldn't want to go into space. I was like, that's crazy. But then you got some kids who are super hyped just knowing that, like, if you understand technology, like, that shit is going to be advancing in the next 20 to 30 years so rapidly that it's going to be like when the internal combustion engine came out, you know what I'm saying? Like, now nobody has to ride a horse anymore. Like, we have these automobiles, and that shit revolutionized everything. Like, they're on the verge of revolutionizing space travel all over again. Yeah, this journey to Mars is gonna be crazy. They're talking about in the 30s, in the 2030s. Next year is 2020, so they're literally saying, like, in the next 10, 15 years, they're trying to get people to Mars. That's still within my lifetime.
That's checkmate. Oh yeah. There are companies that want to send one way and colonize Mars, and then there are people like NASA and ESA that are working together that want to have a return trip. So I still have to look at it as a father that I'll have my child for 20 more years, and then I may not ever see her again. And that's hard.
You gotta make it good for the camera, man. You gotta, struggle,
For
cry.
what she's wanting to do, I have to support her. I have to let her go. It's bigger than the two of us.
It's bigger than the two of us.
We know that the next 20 years together is going to be important because we know for sure that those are 20 years that we can't spend together. Obviously, it's not the best thing to be telling your daughter to go on a mission to Mars and leave the planet, but I still know that he supports me anyway.
Man, this little girl gonna grow up and be a stripper. I'm just saying, you never know.
It makes me sad because I'm saying, oh, she's gonna leave me one day. But then I remember, we might as well live now, and when the future comes, we'll be able to accept it because...
Well, didn't I see you on that documentary? Fuck NASA!
There are a multitude of challenges to become an astronaut. You have to have the right mental attitude, you have the right health, you have to have the right skills. Last year we put out a call for the next cadre of astronauts. We had thousands apply, and we're accepting less than 10.
The biggest challenge for Alyssa is just trying to get everything done that she wants to have for her unique resume.
Specifically for the Mars mission, I would say that they're even more precise about who they want for that mission. So think about that motivates me to put in the hard work now that I know to build up kind of a good resume that helps me stand out from others when I do apply.
The opportunity to be one of the youngest people that's ever ventured into space, to be a trailblazer, a pioneer, I think this is everything she's always wanted to do.
Just recently was accepted to Possum Academy. She's the youngest person ever to be accepted to that program.
Basically everyone who's ever gone to this program either has a college degree, either has a master's, either has a PhD, or is working on any of those. So they're all a lot older than I am. What Possum Academy is, they are preparing people for spaceflight. I will actually be certified to go to space.
I think it's really significant that Alyssa is a girl who has this huge dream to make it to Mars. She is someone that girls can look up to and say, hey, look at what she did. Look at what this girl did who was the same as me once.
So it is important to inspire kids and also adults. You can't let anyone take your dreams away from you. No matter how crazy it might sound, follow that through and never give up on your dream.
I know that's right.
2033 mission.
Tell them, baby girl.
Always talk to us about. That's when the sun is going to have the least amount of radiation going. That's when Mars is going to be the closest that it's been in thousands of years. That's when they'll have the technology perfected. Yes, if she was a few years older, a few years younger, it may not be working out. But the way doors have opened for her, it is definitely destiny working its hand that this kid is meant to go to Mars.
And liftoff.
Mars will be the greatest adventure ever.
Mars, new episodes, Mondays at 9, starting November 14th on National Geographic.
Mars. I remember I read this old Ray Bradbury, I think it was. It was called the Martian Chronicles. The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. It was just a bunch of little short stories about things that could happen on Mars.
Steady light in the night sky for us. You and I can go outside tonight on a clear night, look towards the southwestern sky, and see a bright orange star, the red planet. Looking at Mars, it's also of interest because it is within what we call the habitable zone around the sun. And so we're going to be exploring tonight a little bit more. I'd like to ask our guests here, our experts, on a little bit about that. And let's get into the challenges and what it really takes to get to Mars.
Mars is incredibly difficult to get onto because you have to go through the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is not your friend because it swells up because of dust. When there's a lot of dust in the atmosphere, it shrinks. There are lateral winds, although the atmosphere is thin. But it is a scientific bonanza once you're on the surface. It has ancient rivers, had ancient lakes, hydrothermal systems. All the evidence is there, the geologic evidence. It's from the first half of geologic time. So early in geologic time, Mars was warm and wet. And the international exploration of Mars robotically is all focused on if it was habitable and whether or not life got started and evolved and is still there.
Amazing. So let's look at some of the technology. Let's talk about this character here. Right? He's making a lot of buzz in the media, right? Elon Musk, he's the head of SpaceX, and his true love and passion is space exploration, and his vision is to send humans to Mars. So NASA isn't really alone. They have partnerships. Is that
right? You know,
integral now?
Yeah. So NASA historically has partnered with people, has consulted and contracted with organizations all over the country, right? And so as we're looking into this next phase, this going to Mars, there's still going to have to be these partnerships. As you say, Elon Musk is one, but there are others that are going to help us do the important work of figuring out what exactly the best technology is. But it is definitely something that we're going to have to do together.
It's not an easy thing.
No.
Right? So take a look at this.
T-minus 4 minutes.
We've reached a tipping point. Thousands of years from now, whatever we become, whoever we are, we'll look back at these next few decades as the moment in time that we are moving off this planet as a multi-planetary species.
BC and DC verify F9 and Dragon are a startup.
F9 is a startup.
And SpaceX stands as nothing less than a massive game changer.
Stage 1, Stage 2 present flight.
Elon Musk says the only reason that I founded this company is to get human beings to Mars.
LCLD, go for lunch.
The key to making Mars economical is the reusability of rockets.
T-minus 1 minute.
Yeah, I just don't think there's any way to have a self-sustaining Mars space without reusability. Getting the cost down is really fundamental. If wooden sailing ships in the old days were not reusable, I don't think the United States would exist.
T-minus 30 seconds.
And if they nail this ability to land a rocket any way they want on Earth, then they can nail doing it on Mars.
T-minus 15.
This flight, that's a huge deal. We haven't yet landed the rocket, so it's going to be hopefully our first successful landing.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Vehicles reach maximum aerodynamic pressure. Stage 1 propulsion is still not.
Yo.
Altitude 32 kilometers. Speed 1 kilometer per second. Downrange distance 13 kilometers.
It's Frankie.
Space is defined by this frank relationship between failure, risk, and innovation, which is you can take risks, you can try something very innovative, but you're more likely to fail.
So what was it supposed to look like? Well, you have the booster going up, and what I'm showing you here is going to be a composite, a long exposure photograph, what it's supposed to have looked like, and then the booster coming back down. And what you see on your right hand side of the screen is the booster that came down back onto the launch pad. And what I want to know, Jedidah, is why is it so important to have reusability when we're talking, I'm talking about Mars, going to Mars. Why is that so important?
Yeah, over the long term, the hope is that if you can reuse something, it's cheaper, right? You want it to be cheaper and more efficient. It's sort of your workhorse that you just continue to use. It's not always the case that things are cheaper when you reuse them, but you want something that you can, use, rinse, recycle, reuse, right? That's rinse, repeat. That's what you want. The other thing is you want to be able to use that piece of technology as scaffolding for the next thing you do. Maybe you use, a piece of your booster to build the first structure, right? Maybe you recycle it in that way. So you hope first that there is a cost savings. You hope that there is a sort of efficiency that you can build in, and third that you can use it as a scaffolding for the next thing.
let's look at the idea of the timeline. And what is it, like 7 months to get there, right? Just to get there. So we need to right now start building up on that. And one of the most recent attempts at that is the year-long mission that both the U.S. and Russians took part in. U.S. astronaut Scott Kelly, you can see here in this image, spent a whole year coming back in March, exploring this whole concept of what happens to human body being exposed to microgravity for long duration. So we're starting to work on that, those aspects. And I'd like to know, I mean, what toll does it take on the human body? What does space travel, long-term space travel, do to a human body?
The truth is we don't really know, right? We've never done this before. Commander Scott Kelly and his colleagues were sort of the first to stay in space as long as they did. And even there, they had a lot more protection from Earth, from the sort of microgravity. Also, we were still in the magnetosphere, so they had protection from radiation. Still more radiation than they'd have if they were where we are, but we don't know what's going to happen when you put a person in sort of interplanetary travel for 7 months. We don't know. We know already that you lose bone mass. We know that you've got these radiation effects. We have no idea about the psychological impact. So these are all things that we're still trying to understand. And his mission, their mission, is critical to understanding at least step one in the process. So there's a lot to be understood.
When we get there, I'd like to know, like, how are we going to choose the landing sites? Now, what I've got here for you is the map of Mars, and these are potential landing sites that we have. What goes in, Ray? Maybe you can speak to this about choosing.
Well, there are engineering aspects, there are science aspects. You want to go to a place that's scientifically interesting. It could be layered deposits that represent kind of ancient riverbeds or lakes. It could be ancient hydrothermal deposits from volcanoes, or whatever it turns out to be. But you also need to land in a place that you can get back out of. And that's the plus or minus 50. It's relatively easy to go back into orbit, and not too cold. Because Mars is cold to begin with. It's way below freezing on average. And if you go to the high latitudes, it's super cold.
The ultimate goal is to send humans. So what I'd like to know is, what do you guys think in terms of the specialties? What kind of people should we be sending to Mars?
It's an important point to recognize that going to Mars is going to be, what they call socio-technological, right? It is not just going to be the technical that takes us there. It's not just going to be the sociological or the psychological. It is going to be the interaction of those two things, the optimization of those two things that makes it happen. So yeah, you want people that have skills that are technical. You want them to be able to fix things and create experiments. Physicians, you need someone there in case you have medical emergencies. But you also want the kind of mental stamina to be able to deal with all of the conditions that you're going to be sort of faced with. So as I look at it, I think about not just your skills in terms of what you've been educated to do. I think of a variety of perspectives, of life experiences, of outlooks on life, because all of those things are going to be necessary to make this work. So we need an inclusive environment and an inclusive set of people.
I guess growing food is going to be important, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's this idea of being able to reuse and create a sense of self-sufficiency, right? We cannot haul all the food we'll ever eat to Mars if we stay, all of these questions, right? You just can't bring it. You've got to create self-sufficiency and food security there, right? So the idea is that you want to figure out ways to grow things on Mars. And not just for food, which is going to be important, but again, towards that social component, you'll want something to do that brings you closer to nature, right? We've seen Mars is an arid place. There's not much happening there, as we can see so far. So you want some green. You'll want to get your hands in the dirt. You'll want to grow something, see it progress over time. So there's that mental sort of restorative piece of going and being out in nature, even on Mars.
I mean, that's interesting, but when we're talking about going to Mars, to me this looks like a candy wrapper. I don't know, but there's like trash on Mars right now already, right? There's trash. I mean, we're already.
It's probably a piece of the sky crane.
Right. We're not living there. Humans aren't there yet. We're sending our stuff there, and then we're already, altering Mars, right? There's already alterations of Mars, and there's talk about, how humans will be altered by Mars as well. There's a lot of talk about that. And I want you guys to check this little video out, this whole idea of altering Mars and stuff. It's really fascinating.
I was going to tell people they'll only pay for what they need with Liberty Mutual. Fine, I'll drive.
Terraforming Mars is not a small job. This is a massive project. This is a bigger project than anything humanity has ever attempted.
Terraforming is taking an environment such as Mars and making it more Earth-like.
Terraforming is like super science fiction-y right now. I don't think people understand how big planets are, so terraforming one is a ludicrous task.
You solve all the problems except breathing. So once Mars is terraformed and made more Earth-like, you're still going to have to wear a helmet on your head of some sort or some kind of breathing apparatus.
Might we have the urge to tinker with our DNA such that you don't need a spacesuit on Mars?
We are on the edge right now of being able to change our own genome and our own genetics in our own bodies in real time.
Our ability to control DNA, the programming language of life, helps us open up Mars. What happens if there is a virus that drives some kind of a flu and knocks out a large population or a large percentage of your group? You can actually sequence the virus, send it back to Earth to analyze, and you can send back from Earth, a upgraded T cell.
If you do interfere with our genome so that you can survive on Mars, you're pretty much going through a one-way door and saying, I will never go back to Earth.
We might very well have a future in which you have different kinds of humans that look very different from each other.
Once we get computers that are like smarter than humans at thinking about stuff and coming up with stuff, we can ask them to figure out how to cure viruses.
We can kind of tell them, look, we want to explore and this is what we'd like to do. And then the robots, either the rovers or the helicopters or the balloons, can make their own judgment and actually do the exploration.
So ultimately, we're going to need things like machines that can make machines if we want to have a solar system civilization.
Well, future technologies that we're developing on Earth now, like 3D printing and electric cars, can actually be extremely useful to us in creating an outpost of civilization on Mars.
Imagine being able to send a 3D printer to the Martian surface that sort of pulls the soil out, adds some water, adds some binder, and is sitting there 3D printing shelters in advance of a community coming. And you've got your homes pre-built, waiting for you right there.
So, Jedidah, this is all nice, but what happens if we find life on Mars? Will our plans be altered?
I think they should be, right? Because now we've got to understand and figure out what's happening, try not to completely decimate their way of being in life in terms of probably microbial structures and such. Also, just small tidbit, no terraforming.
Why is that?
It's a stupid idea.
Okay. Why?
It's out of equilibrium. I mean, Mars is cold and dry today for a reason. Early in geologic time, there were volcanoes. There was a massive amount of greenhouse warming from the gases coming up. Because it's a small planet relative to Earth, it stopped its internal activity sooner than the Earth. So the gases in the atmosphere were on a one-way trip to be oxidized and placed into minerals. So if you increase the amount of sunlight with mirrors or whatever, you can sublimate, get more water vapor in the atmosphere, more rain. But what's going to happen? It's going to react with the rocks and go back down into the subsurface eventually. There's a famous reaction that was codified by Harold Urey. It's a very distinguished Nobel Prize-winning chemist. And it's the way the Earth stays more or less the way we like it. Sometimes it goes into deep freeze, sometimes it's really warm. But what happens is the volcanoes pump up the gases that keep us warm. But the hydrologic cycle consumes those gases as carbonic acid. CO2 goes into the water, and it reacts and forms limestones. But the limestones go back downstairs, get decomposed, and the gases come back up, as greenhouse gases through volcanoes. If you stop the internal engine, you go in the one-way deep freeze. That's what happened to Mars, because it's smaller than the Earth. So terraforming can increase the temperature of the surface but you can get some gas out, but it will eventually get corroded and put back down into the subsurface in a one-way trip. So it may work for a couple of decades, but over longer time, it's bogus, in my opinion.
And also would decimate whatever is there that we don't know yet.
Yeah, there's a very important paradigm that all the nations are following called planetary protection. So you sterilize spacecraft before they're on the surface, because the worst thing to have happen is to go to Mars in the future and find ourselves.
All right, I have a question, one last question. If you could take anything from Earth, any physical object in Earth, what would it be? And you take it to Mars. When you want to take something to Mars, what would one thing be?
I'm going on my 47th wedding anniversary, and I really like my wife, so she would go with me.
You get points. You get points for that.
That's video.
Is this being taped?
Yeah.
Away on the floor, Whistling is here. And that's out.
Tremendous performance by this engine side.
There are many reasons that we want to go to Mars. The first big one is, why did Mars transition from what was once a warmer, wetter world to the cold, dry planet we see today?
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It is the first human footstep on the moon, and the world is forever changed.
Fantastic feeling. One of great accomplishment. It was almost miraculous. We did it for all the right reasons. We did come in peace for all mankind.
On July 20th, 1969, as the lunar dust compresses beneath the boot of astronaut Neil Armstrong, NASA's Apollo project scores a bullseye. Until the fall of 1957, the moon is Earth's only satellite, orbiting for eons in silent vigil. That October, the hush of space and America's sense of security is shattered by Sputnik. The sound of the Soviet satellite becomes eerily familiar to Americans. Fears escalate that the Cold War could heat up with catastrophic effect.
Immediately everyone thought, well, they're now able to really, their military machines around the world up above, who is not going to be in danger?
President Eisenhower combined several agencies working on rocketry and flight to create one civilian agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Over the next years, the United States successfully launches satellites with great scientific payback. To prepare for human flight, several animals, including a chimpanzee named Ham, survived the ride to space and back. But once again, these American accomplishments are eclipsed by the Soviet space machine. April 12, 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin becomes the first human in space. To temper this latest Soviet triumph, the U.S. needs to put its own man in space. That man is astronaut Alan Shepard.
Shepard's flight had tremendous impact. I think it was the leading technological accomplishment of that era, and led to the whole future of the exploration to the moon.
Unlike Gagarin's 108-minute orbit of Earth, Shepard's suborbital flight, the nation's lone human venture into space, lasts just 15 minutes. Nonetheless, President Kennedy goes before Congress and lays down the gauntlet.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The combination of the Gagarin flight and the Bay of Pigs disaster with Cuba, I think, pushed Kennedy towards something that would be positive and would show that we were ahead of the Soviet Union.
President Kennedy's interest in space moves beyond just beating the Soviets. As his passion grows, so does his rhetoric.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It will take an all-out effort by thousands of dedicated Americans to design and build the machines and methodologies needed to succeed, one small step at a time.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
February 20th, 1962. Glenn circumnavigates the Earth 3 times.
The single most important factor was that man could survive and perform as well at zero gravity as he could at 1G.
0G, and I feel fine.
By May 1963, the U.S. Mercury program flies 6 manned flights. But the last, Gordon Cooper's 34-hour solo mission, still leaves the moon out of America's reach. The Gemini program is the next step. Its larger capsule carries 2 astronauts. Mercury veteran Gus Grissom flies with John Young aboard Gemini 3, the program's first manned flight. On Gemini 4, Ed White opens the hatch and steps out into the void as America's first spacewalker.
I feel like $1 million. I'm
Extravehicular activity, EVA, in NASA speak, is critical to a moon mission.
Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So too is the ability of 2 spacecraft to meet up, or rendezvous in space. It happens on Jim Lovell's first flight.
The first rendezvous of Gemini 6 with Gemini 7, I think, was a magnificent milestone in the quest to go to the moon, because we had to determine the types of rendezvous that we want to do around the moon, and we first had it just about around the Earth.
By Gemini's 12th and final mission, rendezvous and docking are well practiced.
Gemini 12, Houston, Capcom, 1 minute to LOS. Your EVA record, beautiful job.
NASA is now ready to shoot for the moon. But there are just 3 years left to meet President Kennedy's goal, and no one really knows how close the highly secretive Soviets are. And of the moon itself, little is known.
Could be dust up to 25, 30 feet thick. If you landed on it, you would sink into the moon. If you landed on it and set out some fire from the rockets, the exhaust it would cause this huge inferno on the lunar surface. So what were the radiation problems on the moon from the sun? What were the thermal conditions you had to deal with on the lunar surface?
Getting answers falls to a series of robotic spacecraft. In mid-1966, Surveyor 1 lands on the lunar surface. The 11,000 photos it sends back help to dispel fear and clear the way for the Apollo moon landing program. 2 short months after the final Gemini flight, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee are posing for photos and spending hours in simulators as they prepare for the first Apollo mission less than a month away. January 27th, 1967. The crew was in the capsule, mounted atop a non-fueled Saturn 1B for a dress rehearsal of the countdown sequence.
Now we're going to hit the moon. We can't talk with
Already raised the tensions of the launch pad. When 5.5 hours into the test, Ed White's shouts were heard.
At that point, things progressed with absolutely stunning speed. I mean, it was only a matter of 20 seconds before the crew was unconscious. Moments later, the pressure from the fire had increased to the point where it literally ruptured the hull of the spacecraft. Toxic smoke flew into the White House. The technicians were struggling to get the hatch open and rescue the crew, but they were driven back by the intense heat and the smoke. Many long minutes passed before they could open the hatch, and of course, by that point, the crew had gone. All 3 astronauts were dead.
The loss of Grissom, White, and Chaffee momentarily cripples NASA's moon landing program. But as the 3 astronauts are given heroes' burials, Apollo, their mythological figure, Phoenix,
All right,
begins
I'm out for a while, bro.
its
I'll be back later on.
ashes.
Peace.